Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. And today I've got a guest, which if you watch the podcast, you might recognize her face because she was on a couple other episodes, although today she'll probably do a lot more speaking than she did in the previous ones. I'm going to let her chime in a little bit more here and there than the last few that we did together. But with me today is Andi, and Andi is, I never know what to call you. Like VA doesn't seem like enough, admin doesn't seem like enough, like my right-hand woman, she does basically like all the back end stuff, anything creative, anything that looks really nice. She's doing all of that, all the tech. Anytime I have a tech issue, like she is my go-to. So super excited to have her back on.
Guys, how's it going?
Yeah, well, awesome. So today we are doing a deep dive into binders. And this has already come up twice for me today, so I am gonna just throw this out here to this is gonna be a more technical episode. There's gonna be some things that I am going to try to explain in as plain, normal English language as I can. And some of it is pretty technical. And, for reference, whenever we do an episode like this, and we've done many like this, that can be more technical, we always try and keep it in plain language. And if you are familiar with our content, if you follow our content, you know, and hopefully you know, that I really try and keep things in plain, normal sounding language as opposed to really technical, really sciencey, really like deep into the physiology, into the chemistry, into biomechanics of a variety of things, because I don't think most people understand it or care. And if you're ever interested in having me do some deeper, more technical explanations of some things, like I do that too, by the way. I have all of that background knowledge and I can go into some science on quite a few quite the variety of different things related to health and wellness. And for me, I learned this really early on as a personal trainer that most people don't care. Most people aren't going to understand it, and they rather hear an explanation in a way that they can actually understand and process it without all the jargon, without needing to know every single little detail. And that being said, I do have some clients who are like, tell me all the things. I want to know all of the things. Like, talk to me in the sciencey kind of language, and it's fun to kind of geek out on some of that. And there's a reason why we don't do that. And I know a lot of people in the health and wellness industry do that. And us not doing that is very on purpose for a very particular reason. Because I'm not trying to talk to other health coaches. Yeah, I love other health coaches, and those they can be really valuable. And obviously we have other practitioners that work with us. And that's generally not who we're talking to in like 99% of our content. So always just like to throw that out there too. So talking about binders. So I want to start with a little technical information here as some background information, because this is going to be really important as we talk about binding different things, detox pathways. I'm not going to go too deep into the phases of detoxification. We have done some other episodes where we do dive deeper into that. So obviously feel free to jump back and, our liver detox pathway or drainage pathway episode. That's a good one where we dive a little bit deeper into that. But there is a piece of this that I do want to talk about because once again, this is going to be pretty important. It's going to come up when I'm talking about a handful of binders here. And that is the role of bile, bile flow, bile duct health, and the role of bile from a detoxification standpoint. Now, bile also plays a really big role in digestion. It's really important for digesting fats and plays a really big role. And if you don't have a gallbladder, your body can struggle with bile flow, bile duct health in your liver because your body no longer has a place to store that bile. And what our bodies like to do is they like to produce bile in our liver, and then they send it down to our gallbladder where it has a nice little house until it's ready to be released, typically when we eat fat, which should be at almost every single meal, which is why with people who don't have a gallbladder, having that ox bile is really important at every single meal. And once again, I'm going to talk a little bit when we get to one specific binder, a little bit more in detail, especially if you don't have a gallbladder and some of the complications that we could see what that can come up with that, and a medication that you may be familiar with. If you've had your gallbladder removed, that can also act as a binder in some different ways. So we produce this bile, and then we have bile ducts, which release the bile. And there's a lot of things that can happen with this bile. If you don't eat a lot of fat, and for me growing up, I remember my mom was like super low fat kind of person for a long time. She was hardcore into the Atkins diet for a while. I remember growing up, the butter that we used was always the I can't believe it's not
Can't believe
butter.
it's not
Just
butter.
yeah, the super processed fake full of chemical kind of stuff.
The
And that's because
90s.
yeah, exactly. Like any sour cream, any any of that kind of stuff was always like low fat, non-fat. And we know better now that that is not a great way to do, because when they pull out the fat from those things, they're putting chemicals, and a lot of it is just sugar. They're putting a bunch of sugar in there to still make it taste good, because fat does very much make things taste really good, by and large. So we have this bile, we have bile ducts, and so this bile can get stagnant. It can get almost, the way I like to describe it, as like sludgy. It gets like thick and just like sludgy. Doesn't look great. And our bile ducts can get clogged up. They can get clogged up with the bile itself, especially when bile is not consistently being released. This can be a big thing, especially once again, if you don't have a gallbladder, because there's nowhere to store it. And so your liver's producing it, and it just runs free in your body. And that's where a lot of digestive issues start, especially loose stool. You might notice that if you have like a fattier meal, even if it's good, healthy fat, you might notice that you're running to the restroom pretty quickly during and or after, and that may last. And once again, there's a medication that a lot of people are typically put on that is actually a binder as well. And certain people, especially with mold, will be put on that kind of binder, that positive and negatives when it comes to this. But bile also helps in the detoxification process. And one important thing to understand about bile is largely recycled, meaning that, it's not considered technically a waste product, that it is actually reabsorbed as part of the digestive process back into our system, and then it's recycled. And that's a lot of our bile is recycled. So if we have a very heavy toxin load, that can play a big role in our bile production and our bile duct health and the bile health itself. And a lot of times, especially with mold clients, especially if we need some secondary work after some initial work, we'll actually use something called phosphatidylcholine. And phosphatidylcholine, one of the benefits that it does and helps with is it helps to thin out that bile, which helps in the detoxification process. And that can help as bile is recycled, where we're still pushing out the toxins, and basically the toxins aren't getting trapped in this sludgy kind of stale bile that can then impact our bile duct health and cause a lot of issues. This is also where coffee enemas can be really helpful for a lot of people, in that, especially if you do have kind of this sludgy kind of bile, maybe we can tell that from your labs and or symptoms that your bile ducts are just not great. There's some congestion in there. And what I mean by congestion is things just aren't flowing quite as smoothly as we would like. And the phosphatidylcholine can help with that. And coffee enemas will help clear out stale bile, will help to thin out that bile, and will really help to clear out the bile ducts for a lot of people. And, I know for me, especially when I was doing active parasite work, which is really like way back in the day, and that's really when I begrudgingly agreed to start coffee enemas, which I now no longer, I'm such a fan of them. No, they're not comfortable, and the benefits are pretty awesome.
Worth it.
Uh, yeah, they're great. Look, I know that coffee enemas are not everyone's thing, and that's totally fine. We typically don't bring them up right away with most of our clients. And at some point, if we do feel like they're going to be really beneficial, we're going to bring it up and we're going to want to have just a conversation about it. And a lot of that goes back to, once again, like what are your labs? What are symptoms showing as far as bile flow, bile health, bile duct health, and it can help flush out a lot of that. Plus, it helps the liver produce a massive, massive amount of glutathione, which can be extremely beneficial. Toxin load can also cause a lot of brain fog, a lot of trouble concentrating, a lot of issues there. We can have a lot of hormonal imbalances, especially women, and you can get relief from all of that sometimes immediately after a coffee enema. I know for me, a lot of times, if I do feel like my toxin load is getting heavier and I can start to feel some of the cognitive disruptions within that, when I do a coffee enema, it's an immediate clearing. And I go, wow, what a big difference in cognitive and mental clarity that's coming up as a result of that. So just wanted to talk a little bit about that before diving into some of these binders and talking a little bit more, because this bile plays a really big role in our detoxification process. Also, just to note again, our body goes through natural detoxification. If your body does this, your body's actually really good at it until it can't keep up. And there's such a variety of factors that go into this when our body can't keep up. And this can be, maybe we're undergoing a lot of stress and we're producing a bunch of cortisol, and now your body has extra cortisol to filter out. Maybe you're actively being exposed to mold. At some point, sometimes your body just can't keep up with that level. Maybe you have a really high level of exposure to heavy metals. Maybe it's in your deodorant. Maybe it's in your generic allergy medication. Maybe you're using a bunch of aluminum foil. Maybe in your cosmetic products, there's a bunch of aluminum in there. Maybe you have amalgam fillings and you've got mercury. Maybe your water quality is not the best, and we've got radium and uranium, mercury, aluminum. We've got all of these things, and once again, your body just like can't keep up and getting all of this stuff out. Maybe you have PCOS and your testosterone and androgens are really, really high. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that too. But, your body just can't keep up with the amount of things that shouldn't be there and is trying to get those things out. So our body
Thing to
goes through
note
this.
is that it's really easy to do simple lifestyle things every day, or at least multiple times a week, that can help with this detox load or with this toxin load.
Exactly. And most people don't do these things and let it
Right.
go until they start feeling really bad. And that's often when they find us.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of prevention and natural support. And that's a big thing that we always talk about when clients wrap up their work with us is please make sure it doesn't have to be the same level of natural drainage pathway support. And really important that you do keep up with that in whatever that looks like for you. And that might be dry brushing, castor oil packs, coffee enemas, sauna, lymphatic drainage, manual lymphatic work, lymphatic massages. There's just rebounding. There's so many ways to naturally support this process. And when stress is higher, we need more support. And that is, once again, like one of the big things that we talk about is we're all going to go through periods of stress. How can we support our bodies most effectively as we go through that? And continuing with this drainage pathway support work is a really big piece of that. So does that make sense? Anything else you think I should talk about or add to that, Andi, or anything that I didn't mention?
I just really think the drainage pathway support is super important day to day. I mean, even if you don't have a mold problem, still do these things every day because the world around us is so toxic, really, if you think about it. Like everything, if you're tattooed, if you, I mean, all the things you just It just, you have to keep up with it. Otherwise, we're inundating our bodies every day, all day. The food we eat, the things we put on it. Your body
Yeah.
can't keep up anymore.
Yeah. And if you live in a city with higher levels of pollution, if you live by a farm that uses chemicals on their crops, if you live by a
Yep.
golf course, they're going to use a whole bunch of chemicals, by the way, if you live by a golf course. Yeah. If you live by a highway and there's a lot of traffic and exhaust that you're just inhaling on a day-to-day basis, once again, it's just like the level of support that your body needs, and we can lower our toxin load. And at the same time, it's so important that we continue to support our body's natural ability to get this stuff out. And that goes a really, really long way for just overall health, gut health, hormone health, brain health, oral health, all of these things
All
play such a
those
big role in this. Skin
things.
health.
And you
Yeah.
can notice a pretty quick difference too when you start.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So binders help to attach to these things, and we're going to talk about different binders and their different roles and how they help and support our body through that. But when we have a higher level of toxin load, binders can be very supportive in helping push things out and helping to attach to these things that shouldn't be in our body and helping our body naturally get them out. And largely this is going to be, there's three major ways our body does this: urine, stool, and sweat. So that's really the role of binders. And for reference, we don't need like crazy things to support our body's natural ability to detox or bind up these things and push them out. You know, anything that's promoted as like a juice cleanse, you need to do a water fast or a bone broth fast, or I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of these things, by the way, and none of them work. And usually you can end up in a worse place. And the company that I always talk about and never mention their actual name, and multiple people have guessed correctly on the company that I'm talking about, does do one of these, and they utilize certain supplements, and largely they use a protein powder in conjunction with a vegan or vegetarian kind of diet that can last anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks. Once again, I did so many of these, and
Just
just
stresses your
do
body
not
out
like them.
worse so you can't heal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a good look, especially if you have any sort of muscle mass. Man, gosh, just like calories, you're only supposed to eat like very few calories. And look, I've fasted. I've done 1 day fast, like a 24-hour fast. I've also done up to, I think, 3 days is the most I did, and just do not good. Every once in a while, the 24-hour fast. I think the 24-hour fast helped me, and I think this is becoming more popular now and understanding that how big of a role this plays, but the food noise and understanding your relationship to food and the food noise that comes up. And I feel like with any of the GLP-1 things that are out there right now, this is becoming more apparent. And that is the value I saw in fasting while I was doing it, was realizing how much I thought about food just like all of the time. And it's like, okay, I just ate. When is the next time I'm going to eat? What am I going to eat? What's that going to look like? How am I going to get enough protein? Am I going to get veggies? Am I going to, and I just like over consuming and just like realizing how much brain space that was taking up. And by the way, you don't need medications to recognize that or heal from that. And I can tell you, I have very little food noise other than I like to eat. I like food, and I get really excited about eating, generally
Wrong with
speaking.
that.
And yeah, food's amazing. Food's delicious and full of nutrients and so good for our bodies. So when we're talking about these binders, there's quite the variety that are out there on the market. And I think kind of the first thing I really want to talk about is talking about selective versus non-selective binders. Most binders that are out there are non-selective binders, meaning that maybe they do target certain things and they're better for certain things. And I'm going to go through a whole list here. And we need to be very careful with these binders, because these binders do not just attach to these certain things. They can also bind up nutrients. They can bind up food. They can bind up other supplements. They can bind up medication. and can make medication way less effective, and you can have some very negative side effects. These non-selective binders are also not meant to be taken long term. They should be used sparingly here and there. Now, I know a lot of people, especially on mold journeys, may be recommended to take binders for years at a time. I've seen enough cases of it, and I've seen the consequences of it. Never more than a few months should anyone be, and I mean, this is personal opinion, and there's science as to why this should not be done, into understanding that these are not meant to be taken long term. Selective binders, on the other hand, can be utilized longer term. I think the other really important fact that almost no one understands is non-selective binders are largely non-systemic, meaning that they are not working systemically throughout your entire body. They are not helping bind up toxins that are stuck in your brain. They are not helping binding up toxins and colonization within your sinuses that maybe you have mold issues. Maybe you've got yeast and fungal overgrowth issues, which just they start to produce their own toxins when overgrown, and people can have oral thrush. You can have the white coating on your tongue. You can have the white kind of sores, mouth sores, tongue sores, cheek sores that can come up here. And that's a lot of yeast and fungal issues might be presenting on your skin. And these binders are not going to work on a lot of these things because they're strictly working from a digestive tract standpoint, and they're going to work exclusively there and not work throughout your entire body, which is when we think about how toxins work. So our livers are master filtration system, and basically everything goes through our liver. All of our blood, all of our nutrients, medications, supplements, food, like all of this goes through our liver, and our liver sends it to where it needs to go, and then also helps to filter out things that shouldn't be there and transmute them through the detoxification process, the 3 phases of detoxification, to push them out of our body through one of our several ways that we get these things out of here. So I think that's really important to understand. And once again, I don't think most people understand that most non-selective binders are only working throughout your digestive tract and not working systemically. When we think about especially mold and heavy metals cross the blood-brain barrier. They get into your brain. They go up and they can cause brain inflammation. They can cause fluid retention in your brain. We see, especially with mold, you can have a lot of eye problems. I've had people diagnosed with all kinds of weird eye disorders. Even just like vision really starts to go down. Maybe they need glasses. Maybe they need a lot stronger glasses. And this can happen very, very quickly, by the way. And it can be very, very scary when this happens. And it's because largely your brain's not draining. And by the way, if you're not sleeping well, your brain's not draining. And you can easily end up with some toxin overload issues within your brain itself, which will obviously cause cognitive issues. Often we will see mental and emotional struggles in addition to the cognitive pieces of this. So if you've got stuff going on in your brain and you're only taking like a charcoal or clay and you're not sleeping well and not working on that, gonna have some issues there. And we may not see the types of results that we want to because of the limitations within products. And by the way, not all practitioners understand this either. So if you feel like you've got a mold and heavy metal issue and your practitioner is only recommending these non-selective binders, please maybe ask them just additional questions. Maybe do some
I
of
think
your
a
own
really
research.
good way to relate it is to think about like a grocery store. Say you're at the grocery store, you're looking for a specific kind of pasta sauce, right? You're in the produce aisle and you ask the guy, hey, where's this pasta sauce? More likely he doesn't know. He's hanging out over there with the bananas. So if you kind of think of the systemic versus non-systemic that way, it's like you could ask a customer service representative and they would probably know exactly where that is. But if you go strictly to the clay slash charcoal produce guy, they're probably not going to be able to help you so much.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. So, yeah, and so it's just really important to understand how that works. versus then we have selective binders. And selective binders work differently. So one, they work systemically. Two, they're only binding to certain things, which means they can be taken long term, and it can also be valuable to rotate them and or use different ones, targeted ones for different things. And some selective binders are more focused on certain things. A lot of them, as you'll hear, it's like heavy metal based. So many are heavy metal based, and yeah, and there are more specific ones that really, when I think about heavy metal detoxing, like we will use some of these sometimes, depending on the client and how their body responded initially to certain things and all that kind of stuff. But selective binders are more specific in what they target. They work throughout our entire body. And one of the huge benefits, especially with people who have a lot of like a really heavy toxin load, have a lot of gut issues, is that it can help with nutrient absorption versus the opposite of most non-selective binders are binding up some nutrients. And there's some limitations in what we, and how much we can avoid that. And most people who have a lot of toxin load issues have a lot of gut issues and already have a lot of nutrient deficiency issues, which can make those worse and can make it really hard to get our nutrients back into a more even balance level. So we use both within our practice. Largely, we use selective binders, and we almost always, almost, not 100% of the time, but almost always, we are starting with selective binders. And part of that is for all of the reasons, all of the benefits that I just talked about. And here's the other thing. They just work better. I've worked with so many people, and this is myself included, but also, we've worked with thousands of clients over the last 5.5 years that we've had this business, that since I started this business. And the number of people that I work with that come to us from other practitioners is incredibly high. And I've worked with some complicated cases and continue to work with some high level, very complicated cases. And I have one client right now, and she's been in the functional medicine space for 10 years. She also may come on the podcast, by the way. We've talked about that before. And she has a very special journey. She's also my longest standing client. We've been working together for many, many, many years in different capacities. And she had only ever been on selective binders. And even then, I just like what binder she was on, I had a lot of thoughts and feelings. And so when we started diving deeper into the functional nutrition route and functional health route, and I started supporting more on that side of things, obviously I switched her to selective binders. And within weeks, weeks, what a major difference. And look, I pulled her off some supplements. She's on a lot of things. She was on a lot of things. She was on a lot of medications. And her diet is perfect. I've never seen someone so perfect in their diet. She's so on top of the nervous system and trauma work, so on top of the detoxification support work. Like every day for years and years and years now. And she's made a great progress. Like, wow, like how far she has come. And I'll tell you, since we've been working together, wow, what a major, major difference. And a lot of it's really two things. One is the binders. Two, no one's ever touched parasites with her, which is a huge root cause, especially when you have so many toxin load issues. You've got to do some parasite work. It is a non-negotiable. Parasites love, love, love all the toxins, especially mold, mycotoxins, and heavy metals. They love all of it, but especially those ones in particular. And so if you have these issues, we have to address parasites. And no one has done that with her. So I really contribute to both of those things. But when we think about selective binders, largely the ones that we use are from a company called Cellcore. There are other ones out there, and most of the other ones that I've seen don't quite touch what Cellcore does and have the range and capacity that Cellcore does. So Not that I think they're the only company. I think there's a lot of other not a lot. I think there's a few other companies out there who do some selective binders, and so, there's some issues with them too. So, and they don't have quite the range, which is one of the big reasons why we like Cellcore. I'll also say pretty much all of Cellcore's binders, we can mini dose and macro dose, which makes a huge difference when it comes to client work. And their standard dosages, quote unquote standard dosages, what they typically put in, they have pre-built protocols, which we don't use or love. We build our own and kind of customize ours to what the client needs. And you can open up the capsules, you can put it in water, you can mix it in with juice, you can give it to pets, children can use them, and you can also high dose them, which is also not safe or possible with many binders. And especially when we look at people with high levels of mold, I'd say mold and heavy metals, kind of, I put both in this category here. Some people really need the higher dosages and can handle it. And man, do they feel better staying on those higher dosages for a bit. I am one of them. And, if you are working with a practitioner who has some familiarity with Cellcore, but haven't really dove into a lot of their education, a lot of their research, a lot of their back end practitioner support, which isn't as good as it used to be. I'll just kind of lightly say that. Some of the things have shifted. Their products are still very high quality, but some of their practitioner support isn't quite as good as it used to be. But the capacity to high dose this, wow, it's safe, it's very effective, not appropriate for everyone. And when appropriate, it can really move the needle in someone's health journey. And we're such big fans. Once again, these binders are something that people can stay on long term. So if someone's still in mold and doesn't have the capacity to move out, to change jobs, to change schools, and has some limitations in their ability for remediation and completely getting out of it, we're actually able to stay on their binders long term to make sure someone doesn't go backwards and can stay in a healthy place and a place where they're not experiencing the same levels of symptoms that they were experiencing at the height of their
Then can
healing
they,
journey.
let's say someone's living in a moldy area, their apartment has mold or something, they can't move, they're on the binders, they started doing the work, they're detoxing, all these things. Will they ever be okay even if they don't leave the apartment? Like, say they stay in the apartment indefinitely, just being on the binders, they might feel a little bit better, but do they have the potential to really heal?
That's a great question and a hard one to answer. And we get that question quite a bit. So thank you for bringing that up. And it's always a challenging question to answer. Usually what I tell people is we have a very high success rate in helping people heal from mold. And our definition of healed from mold is their symptoms are 90+% healed. It is never, and I say this once again from personal experience, and also, obviously working with clients, thousands of clients at this point. I don't know if there is ever 100%. I don't, like we might get a couple days where we're at like 100%, and it ebbs and flows. And so what I consider is, if you are 90% sleeping well, 90%, 90% of the time, you have no GI issues, like no gut issues, cognition is on point at least 90% of the time, like that's a win in my book, because I don't know if 100% is possible at all points in time. Just life can be
Yeah,
stressful.
it's just
Things
life.
come up. Like,
It's called
yeah,
life.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know if
Just something
we're ever
happened.
consistently at 100%. With people who are actively still in mold, I say 80% instead of 90%. Is 80% of the time you should feel little to no symptoms. And so I just drop that down just a little bit. It's also the severity of symptoms and things that they were experiencing should not be life disrupting. And I know sometimes people with mold their lives are not disrupted massively. I have a handful of clients right now who they're like, I don't have a ton of symptoms. Like, I have these 2 or 3 things that I don't love. They are mold related. We've tested. And that's it. They just have these couple little things that bother them. And we have to just look at the bigger picture as to, okay, cool, your body's not in a terrible place. If we don't do the work, you could get there. And my goal is for you not to get there. And so how can we restore the body's natural abilities, especially in preparation for stressful times in our lives, for perimenopause, for going through menopause, and how can we support our bodies through that? But if someone is actively living in mold and or working in mold or going to school in a moldy environment, yeah, I change the expectations just a little bit for that. So that's a great question. So when we look at these non-select or these selective binders from Cellcore, there's four main ones that they have, and if you look at that, they have a sheet, they have a lovely little chart that goes over all of their binders. They also include their product called CT Minerals. And I'm going to talk about this closer towards the end and talking about mineral balancing and the roles that minerals can play in helping support the body's detoxification process and why they and other companies, by the way, may consider minerals as detoxification support and a rebinder. For the topic right now, I'm going to exclude that and talk more specifically about their more standard binders and how they work and how they look and all that kind of stuff. So, we have four main ones. We have Biotoxin binder. This is their entry-level binder. If you are just starting your healing journey and want a really good basic binder as a starting point, this is the one. It is rare that I see reactions to this if we start at least at a half dose. For people who are more sensitive, typically we start at a quarter dose. If we need to mini dose it, we can. It actually tastes pretty good if you open the capsule and mix a little bit in water. It actually tastes pretty good. And people who have a lot of issues with their stomach ulcers, just a lot of irritation, gastroparesis, things like that, sometimes drinking the binder can actually be very, very soothing for the stomach itself, which is also another benefit. Whereas you can't drink most binders you don't want to drink. But for this case, this can actually be very, very soothing and very healing to drink this binder. It's not something we recommend often, and it does come up every once in a while. So this biotoxin binder is good for ammonia, which is largely released by bacteria, parasites. If you have Lyme, co-infections of Lyme, this can be really valuable. Other kind of bacterial byproducts are super good for different environmental and industrial toxins. So, for example, we've had people work in hospitals where or factories almost that have high levels, like industrial level cleaning products or medical grade cleaning products that they can't avoid. And they do have high levels of toxins in there. And biotoxin binder can be really valuable for that. Also, if you have mold issues, mycotoxin buildup, it can be good for that. It's good for parabens and phthalates, which most of us are generally exposed to decently. So it's good to help start to bind up a lot of those things that can kind of build up within our system. So that's biotoxin binder. And then we typically would move into, like, if we go in order of strength here, and there's a really clear 1-2 step. 3-4 gets a little fuzzy, depending on the person and what we're looking at. So number 2 would be Virad Chem. And Virad Chem is pretty cool. So Virad Chem is made up of 3 binders in and of itself. So part of it is biotoxin binder. So about a third of it is biotoxin binder. So it's getting all of those things that I just mentioned as a piece of this. It's also part HMET or HMET, which is their heavy metal binder. So it starts to bind up some of the heavy metals. It also works on like pesticides and herbicides, including glyphosates, which once again, like we're all really exposed to a lot of those, and always a good idea. We're also, generally speaking, high levels of heavy metals. Most of us are exposed to more heavy metals than anything else kind of on a day-to-day basis. And then it's its own little binder that is super good for, we'll call them like radical chemicals. The way they list it is volatile organic compounds is the technical term. But for example, if you have radium, if you undergo a lot of MRIs, CTs, PET scans, using a lot of contrast, and I say this from very recent experience with my fiance, who I'm like, we're working back up to Virachem because you need to be on that for a bit. Just based on the amount of scans that he's had and needed, by the way, just he's needed those. And what can we do to support his body and getting that stuff out? Mammograms, x-rays, like all of these things, super good. Virachem is super good for this. And if you have viral issues, which once again, like personal experience here, EBV, cytomegalovirus. I'll even throw like for some people with Lyme and Lyme co-infections, a lot of them actually do better on Virachem than Biotoxin binder and feel more relief. And part of that can be from, and we talked about this in the chronic viral episodes. Lyme is not a virus. Super understand that. And it can mimic some different viral properties. And so Virachem can be supportive for certain people with Lyme and Lyme co-infections, as long as we're addressing also the bigger root causes as to what is contributing to Lyme flares and continued Lyme co-infection issues. So then it gets a little fuzzy as to like, what is the next step? If someone has mold issues, mycotoxin issues, we'll typically go for Carboxy next as like the next stepping stone. For people who don't, we'll usually go to HMET or HMET. And the reason being is Carboxy is arguably the strongest binder that they have. For reference, Carboxy is a powder, about 100 times stronger than Biotoxin binder. It is straight fulvic and humic acid, which is super, super good and supportive for the entire body, and can be incredibly strong, even at teeny tiny doses. The last time I took Carboxy, so we always start with a sprinkle, and I'm talking like, so they have a little scooper in there. We recommend emptying the scooper so there's nothing in the scooper, and then you take your glass of water and you tap it once, and that is your starting dose. Now, the practitioner in me, the ego in me, went a little heavier than that, but I still started very small. I started with like just the bottom of the scooper filled up with Carboxy, and it took me out for 2 days. Fatigue, headache, histamine reactions took me out for 2 days. I am consistently on binders. I am consistently doing detox support, and it took me out for 2 days. So just to give a little perspective about how strong this is, yeah, we will start. I mean, even if someone reacts to that sprinkle, what we'll do is be like, hey, get like a big water bottle. We're talking like 64 ounces. Put your sprinkle in there and drink like a third of it in a day throughout the day. And that is your starting dose. And we can also work up to 4 scoops twice a day at the high end. So we can very low dose it and we can very high dose it. And it just depends on the person. It also depends on their tolerance to it. But this is a great binder for mycotoxins. And a lot of times what we'll see in our practice is if we're helping someone go through their mold healing journey, we'll do Carboxy and then we'll also do some systemic parasite work at the same time. And then we'll run labs again. Some people need no additional mold work and they are good to go. And that is the only technical mold binder that they actually needed. And we can move on to whatever else their body needs. And sometimes that's just like, all right, well, let's just rebuild your gut and you're good to go. And you're totally fine. For some people, we do need additional work and we will work on that. And once again, like it's probably like 50-50 on cases that we see where some people do need some additional support work. Some people don't. And that's a really big deal. If you have ever tried to heal from mold, if you've heard about other people's struggles and their healing journeys, healing from mold, it's a really big deal to only have to go through this one major mold binder and then be done. And even if we have to do additional work, it's an additional 2 months usually, and that's it. And we're all done. And that is a really big deal. So we are huge fans of the Carboxy. Carboxy is also really good for yeast and fungal byproducts, which if you have mold issues, you probably have some yeast and fungal issues. They really go hand in hand, so it's super good for that. And once again, sometimes we do need additional yeast and fungal work kind of towards the tail end of someone's healing journey with mold and mycotoxins, but sometimes we don't. And once again, I contribute a lot of that to the carboxy in helping to bind up and lower that yeast and fungal load within the body so that it can be in a more healed space. Um, Also good for environmental and industrial toxins, and parabens is kind of like the big things that, and once again, it's biotoxin binder, but straight biotoxin binder, straight fulvic and humic acid, and it's about 100 times stronger than the biotoxin binder. The other one is the HMET or HMET. And this is largely for heavy metals, super good for heavy metals. This made a massive difference. I think this was probably the third or the fourth kind of heavy metal work that I had done, and not seen a ton of movement, but the HMET made a big difference for me. And I'll tell you, even like not that long ago when I was really working on doing a lot of sauna work, and I knew my heavy metal load was a little bit high, and I was pushing that stuff out, and I could smell it from my body coming out because it has a very particular type of smell. I also used to smell that way all of the time when I had heavy metal issues. It makes such a big difference. It makes it just, it shortens the time for actual heavy metal detoxification by so much. And once again, we can mini dose this. We can also high dose it. Just kind of depends on the person and how we kind of do with this. So it's also something that's easier. I've jumped in and out of HMET several times and never had any issues. Once again, the Carboxy, yeah, even I had issues, even with all of the work that I do. The HMET typically not. And we typically will see that with clients where they don't have a ton of issues as long as we've worked up to that. And then the HMET is also good for pesticides, herbicides, including glyphosate. So it's something that I will rotate into my own kind of practice, usually once a year. I may not even go through a whole bottle. I may do either like a half dose for a month or two. Maybe I do a full dose for 1 month or 6 weeks. And I find it to be very, very supportive in my own health and healing and staying healed and all that kind of stuff. So those are largely the Cellcore binders. Also, they can be taken with food, which just makes life a whole lot easier a lot of times. Yeah, and some, depending on what other products you're on, sometimes other products can't be taken with food either. Sometimes they can't be taken around anything. And these non-selective binders that we're about to dive into cannot be taken with anything else. We need space, total space from them. And so that's really important to understand as well and make sure that we're very mindful of. But once again, these binders can be taken with food, which also means that the reaction that someone's likely to have goes down drastically. If you take something with food, you've got something in your belly, reaction chances go down. Not saying they're not possible because we do see them, and they're typically going to be far less than some others. So I think that's also important to know. Anything else you want to add or anything before we move on?
Oh, how about layering the binders? Like, I know we get questions a lot where it's like, well, okay, I think I have this and this. Can I just take both of those binders at the same time? How do I balance it out? Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, it depends. I have people, and it's rare that we'll be taking multiple binders at the same time. It is not super common. It's usually not necessary and can be very overwhelming for the system. There is an order of operations when it comes to people who have mold issues. And if someone has mold issues, the chances that they also have heavy metal issues is astronomically high. I mean, it's like 95% of people with mold issues also have heavy metal issues because, once again, our just general life exposure to heavy metals is pretty high. And if your body can't keep up with the mold stuff, it's definitely not keeping up with the heavy metal load as well. So, in theory, yes, you can take multiple binders. You could be taking all four of these binders all at the same time, in theory. In practical experience and actual application, no. Every once in a while, I will have someone, and I can think of one current client that I have her typically on two at the same time. Now, she has a very complicated case. She had mold issues. We were almost done healing from those. And then she had like 4 or 5 re-exposure experiences, and it sent her system into severe crisis mode, had severe messile issues, developed POTS. Just and she's in a much better place now. She's able to work again, and she's in a better place. And there are certain times she still has a decent parasite load that we're continuing to work on. And so sometimes we will layer binders. And typically with her, if we're going to layer binders, it's going to be a combination of biotoxin and Viredchem. It's not going to be a combo of any of the stronger ones, because those are really strong in and of themselves, and it can be really too much if we add too much into the body. And for us, the way that we approach health and wellness is we want to give the body the most optimal conditions. And a big piece of that is just how do we lower stress inside and outside of the body. And if we lower stress enough inside and outside of the body's going to be able to heal itself. And that's really what our goal is. We're also never trying to reach zero toxins. I don't know if that's possible, and we can test and we can do continued testing, and I just don't know. Just because we're
It's always
constantly
going to be
being
some
exposed.
baseline amount of something. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's about getting them to a low enough level that your body's naturally getting this stuff out consistently and you're not having symptoms. And that if stress does increase, that is not sending you back into a massive flare. That's really the whole goal of this, where you're not actively feeling all of this. And yeah, there is some maintenance work and rotating binders and having a binder every once in a while. Or, for me, I typically have all 4 on hand, if I'm being really honest. I always have Biotoxin and Viredchem. Those are never not in my house. And if I'm doing sauna work, if I'm doing coffee enemas, I'm always using a binder as part of that, regardless of whether I'm in an active protocol or not, because I know how big of a difference they can make. So that is a good point. So yes, and you probably don't need to, or probably don't want to for the vast majority of people. Okay, so moving on to these other binders, and I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, both from a time perspective, but also you're going to start to hear me say the same things over and over and over again. And so I'm going to just not, not go into too great a detail, but I do want to give some reference points on when and how we might use these other binders and some of the applications that I see and value with a lot of these things. So probably the most common one is activated charcoal. It is the one that is most commonly known. You can get it at most grocery stores, drugstores. Super good if you're in a pinch and absolutely need a binder. When might you need a emergency binder? If you get food poisoning, that is it's great to be able to have that on hand. That if you get, let's say, food poisoning, and if you're in a foreign country, if you're out and about, if you're traveling, super good to have on hand. By the way, when I travel, there are always binders that are coming with me, and they are always Cellcore binders. And if I were to ever be in a pinch and I were to get sick from food, from water, from something like that, my first stop would be to get activated charcoal. So that is a great tool to have on hand if needed in an emergent situation. Super good. So that's really like the most common one that you'll see. I'd probably say clay, bentonite clay specifically, is probably the second most common. And clays and charcoals are largely heavy metals. Clay will do some mold, some pesticides. Same thing with activated charcoal. Like it'll do some molds specifically. I don't think it's a great mold binder. Once again, these things are localized to the digestive tract and they're absorbing all these other things. Bentonite clay specifically also absorbs a ton of water. So if you are on any of these binders, I do also recommend bump up your water intake. Also make sure your electrolytes are in a good spot, because you can get really dehydrated and you can send your body into not a great place. You can also get constipated with these ones in particular, especially the ones that are going to pull water, because that can lead to constipation as well. So if you do get constipated on binders, one of the first things I'll recommend is bump up your water intake. Add an extra 10 or 20 ounces a day minimum, especially if you're If you're in a good spot already, I'd say 10 or 20 ounces should absolutely do it. If you're like 40 ounces or below, might want to bump it up quite a bit more. Yeah, with the electrolytes too, because that can play a really big role in constipation. Next one here is zeolite. That's another pretty common one. Heavy metals, ammonia. It can work with some viruses. I was on zeolite for a while when I was going through EBV flares and never noticed a massive difference. I noticed a much bigger difference with ViroChem. ViroChem is something I will start to take if I get sick, and L-lysine is something that'll always be in because it helps to stop the replication of viruses, and inhibit that or help to inhibit that. And then ViroChem is also always coming in once again to limit that viral replication. Just for me as a history with chronic viral issues, I'm extra on top of that if and when I get sick. So zeolite, and then we've got chlorella. Chlorella is probably the most common heavy metal binder that is out there. I used it many times. I never saw a massive difference in, mostly I was doing HTMA for testing with that, and I was on it for probably close to 6 months, which once again, that was too long. I should not have been on a non-selective binder for that long consistently straight. But I saw much better results with HMET, and once again, we see that pretty consistently with clients. And okay, before I move on, so then we got combo binders. The most common one, especially that we will use, is GI Detox. And this is a very common one. Once again, if you are just starting off and your practitioner recommended GI Detox, and this is your introduction into binders and just the functional health and wellness space, I would ask some more questions. I would just it's strong. I mean, we can go through all of Cellcore's binders, go on GI Detox, and people can have reactions to it. Just be very careful with how and when you use it. I think it can be good. We will use it for some of our secondary mold protocols if someone needs that, because different binders bind up just help with different things, and sometimes using a combination can be really valuable. And it's a strong one. So just be very, very careful with that. So this is a combination of zeolite, charcoal, pectin, humic powder. The other one that we'll often see a lot of people use is ultra binder or ultra sensitive binder. Ultra sensitive binder is probably, if you're going to start with a combo binder, that's going to be the one that I'd recommend starting with. Although I do think probably a charcoal or clay, depending on your toxin load, may be a better option, and you might be less likely to react to that depending on the person. But that's a decent one. I was on those for quite some time too. But you'll also see, so the ultra binder is zeolite, clay, charcoal, and then you're going to see aloe in a lot of these, which can be helpful. And aloe can cause loose stool. So some people get constipation when they go on binder. Some people can end up with loose stool. And the aloe can play a really big role in this. So if you want a binder and you start having a lot of like urgent bowel movements, if you have a lot of discomfort and you have like a lot of loose stool coming out, double check to see if your binder has aloe in it, and that might be the culprit. But aloe can be soothing, it can be helpful. And so it can be helpful within that, but just be very careful with that. Another, and I wouldn't call this a popular one, although I feel like has gained some traction over the last year or so, and that is DE, or diatomaceous earth. And we're talking about the food grade version. There's industrial versions, which are in a lot of things and act as a binder. Be very careful with industrial grade because it's not meant to be consumed or breathed in, and can cause a lot of issues if you do breathe a lot of that in. It can also be good for pests. For us, like in an RV, a lot of people will use it as natural because it is safe. And they'll use food grade DE around their campers here, and that helps prevent a lot of pests, whether that's ants, spiders, mice, like all that kind of stuff. So that can be a tool as well, and it is safe. If you have pets and you as a human being, it is safe to kind of be around that. But just being mindful of that. This one is a little bit more controversial. The thought process behind this, behind the chemical reactions and using this as a binder is acting as almost like a scrubbing tool to help pull out toxins specifically from the gut. And there is some research, it's not great research, so we don't typically fall into this category. Does it kill bacteria? Does it kill parasites? Maybe. I think there's a lot better tools out there for both of those things. And some people are really diehard into going into that category here. Then we get into another one, and this is if someone's not ready for self-core binders, this is typically where we're gonna start. Pectin, specifically citrus pectin. And this is a very gentle, low level binder that if people are even reacting, or usually for us, it's not that people reacted to the Cellcore binders, it's mentally and emotionally, there's so much health anxiety that they don't feel comfortable starting there, in which case we're obviously going to meet people where they're at and want to make sure that they do feel comfortable, because if you think you're going to react to something, you are going to react to it. So sometimes we will start with citrus pectin because it is so gentle. And once again, we can mini dose that, but our preference is typically going to be biotoxin binder. If someone's super sensitive, we're going to put it in that a sprinkle in a large water and casually sip it and mini dose it that way. But that is another common one. And then I know we're already at an hour here, but I want to kind of wrap up just a few of these things here, and I can always do another episode if we feel called to. So probiotics are another thought process here. Probiotics, and then also, so we've got regular probiotics, we've got spore-based probiotics. Saccharomyces boulardii is kind of in its own little category here as a binder, and we will use that sometimes as a secondary mold binder where it can help start to rebuild the gut. It's technically a probiotic, and it can act as a binder for certain types of mycotoxins. So that can be helpful for some people. And if we haven't done enough work on clearing out the gut, people can react very poorly to it. So it is never something that we start with. It is for the right person, it can be beneficial, and it can help as a tool in helping bind up additional mycotoxins that are left in the body, and not great for most people, especially starting out. I would not recommend that. And probiotics, same kind of thing, especially spore-based probiotics, can be beneficial in binding up certain things. Once again, it's very localized to the gut. It is only certain types of probiotics, specifically spore-based probiotics, are typically the one that is recommended as a binder. Real hit or miss. If you've got any sort of gut overgrowth issues, though, most often you're going to respond very poorly right off the bat to probiotics. So we never start there. And then nature's natural binder, fiber. And that can be helpful. I would say it's very low level. And yeah, it can. And the reason why it helps with that is it binds to bile and can help bind up fat soluble toxins and can help work around some of that. Now, it also binds to other things, by the way, including hormones, which, once again, for some people, super helpful if we really bump up. And I'm not talking regular levels of fiber within your body. I'm talking like a fiber supplement, additional high levels of fiber that we might use temporarily, and that can act as a binder or binder adjacent support and helping with a few different things. But once again, if you've got a lot of gut issues, you're probably going to react really poorly because it can feed and fuel gut overgrowth issues. And then I think maybe the place to wrap up, just two things real quick. So going back to minerals. So there are different camps and schools of thoughts that, well, because the body naturally does detoxification work and binding work and pushes these things out, if you give your body the resources to do that, that's all you really need. And that's a big piece of, and I know we've talked about it before, the RCP, root cause protocol. And I think there's a lot of value in it. I think it can be great for some people. I've also seen people, really diehard RCP people and practitioners. I mean, you can spend a decade focusing on mineral balancing and you're never quite there. And I know just with a lot of our clientele, long term, I think that's an amazing thing to continue to do, to continue to focus on. It's something that I'm really focused on in my own health and healing, making sure like nutrients from a vitamin and mineral perspective are in a really good spot. And, for example, if you have low copper and low zinc, I mean, it could take 1 to 2 years to get those into a good level, assuming there's not a lot of other things going on. So if you do have a lot of other things going on, I mean, you could be at this for a decade and still not be fully healed. And so, we typically take a little bit of a different approach and do more targeted, more specific healing work. And then as far as keeping the body healed and rebalanced, this is where we will use some HMET testing, which is hair tissue mineral analysis, which really focuses on mineral balancing. You can also use blood work in different labs with that to focus on minerals. And I think there's a lot of value in using it as a tool then. And I just see a lot of people, and as I'm doing practitioner interviews, like a lot of people are trained in HMA. It's a very low level education, and also the test itself is not very expensive. But it can take forever to balance your minerals. And some of us don't have that kind of time to wait a decade to be in a better spot. And if you're in crisis mode, if you've already been feeling bad for months or years, and most of the people that we work with have been feeling bad for years, do you want to wait another 5 to 10 years to be in a really good spot? No, to me personally. Everyone has their own individual choices, and we totally support that, and that's great. It's a long time to wait, though. It's a long time. So that can be valuable. And that's also where sometimes we will use like a mineral-based supplement. That's where CT minerals from Cellcore can be valuable. We don't love that product anymore. They used to have a liquid version that was money. It was so good. They had 3 liquid versions, and man, all of us old school practitioners miss those products so much, and we are just so hopeful any one of them will be back on the market at some point in time. We've been waiting on one specifically for like 3 years. They keep promising us maybe one day. But that is where some of, like minerals, trace minerals from trace minerals research, that's the one we'll typically recommend if we're going to recommend some sort of mineral supplement. But yeah, that can be a really valuable tool because minerals are a huge basis and foundational piece of our body and can absolutely help and support cellular health, mitochondrial health, liver detoxification support, like all of that kind of stuff, and can help with binding and pushing things out of our body. And once again, just for people who are experiencing a lot of symptoms right at the time, can just feel like a lot. It can feel like it takes forever to balance your minerals out, and there's just a lot that goes into it. So we don't typically do that. The other thing is binders, like little fun fact, and you can use most binders, and we do like the Cellcore binders, obviously more for this stuff too, but you can use them topically. So people who have like fungal rashes, fungal issues, get a tick bite, have like a lot of reactions to mosquito bites or bug bites. You take a binder, and you can really use this with almost any binder. Mix it with some water, mix it with a carrier oil. This could be olive oil, this could be jojoba oil. Like there's a lot of different options there. Mix it into like a little paste and put it on your skin. I do this, I do like a detoxification mask every once in a while, and I use a bentonite clay mixed with apple cider vinegar and then a drop or two of a high quality essential oil. Unfortunately, Young Life and doTERRA are not those, in case you hadn't seen the research come out about those, and the high levels of heavy metals in those. But you can mix them, and I put it on my face, and it helps my skin, helps clear up my skin, and super good, especially if you are, for me, once again, like whenever I detox, my skin goes real crazy, and so that can be very supportive. Also, when I'm detoxing and I don't smell great, I'll put it under my arms, and it can help pull toxins out that way too. And it helps me not have to wear deodorant at all, or minimize the amount of deodorant that I have to wear. I don't love deodorant, just in general. Obviously, I use natural deodorant. If I don't have to use any, even better. So yeah, you
Actually, I
can
have a
use some
trick
of
about
the,
that too. Like I put it on my feet. Your feet have the
oh
biggest
yeah.
pores in your body. So I'll like make the paste much like I do with the fun bites, but I put it on the bottom of my feet, throw socks over top, and then just kind of let it chill and wash it off. And that helps just detox the whole body.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's why there's like detox foot baths, and it's way cheaper to do it yourself, by the way. And you can also go
Mhm.
places and like have it done. But yeah, that's a great way to do this. I recently had a client who had a ton of bug bites. I mean, she just got eaten alive. And she's like, I'm so miserable. I'm so itchy. And I go, okay, make this paste, put it on. And she did it. And overnight, they all went away. And she was no longer itchy. And it's completely natural. She only left it on, by the way, for 10 or 15 minutes and then just wiped it off and was totally good. So you don't have
That's
to leave this on
amazing.
for a lot of time. Yeah, amazing. For all my face, and if I do the armpit, I'll leave it on for 15 or 20 minutes until it's just dried. And then I'll wipe it off with like a warm washcloth. Super good. Just I'm such a big fan of these things, and such a nice way to help clear up your skin. And just like if you do it, yeah, if you have a lot of itching, if you have just a lot of topical kind of issues, it can be super great. And we can, for people, we get a lot of people with obviously mold issues, in which case a lot of times they'll have yeast and fungal rashes that pop up, and they can be very uncomfortable. And instead of using a steroid cream, which can have side effects to it, especially if you come off of it, we just start using this binder paste, and man, do they feel such relief. It helps it go away. And then obviously we're addressing bigger root causes internally to make sure that it goes away for good, long term,
Birds,
and
one
addressing the
stone.
reasons. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that's a good place to stop. Anything else you want to add or think we should mention real quick?
I think that's pretty thorough.
Okay, great. I just thought of one more thing. When it comes to mycotoxins and mold, some practitioners are almost two in the science and don't have a ton of application experience. And really, they require you to do a mycotoxin test. And a lot of times they don't even know the differences between the three, and they recommend one that's not as good. If you're going to get a mycotox, get a vibrant mycotoxin test. Yes, it is most expensive, but you don't need to provoke. You also get 29 different mycotoxins versus, for reference, the one from Mosaic's 11. The one from Real Time, I forget. It's somewhere in the middle. It's higher than 11, but less than 29. And I can't quite remember the number. But the bind from Vibrant is the only way to go. And some will only use binders that are very specific to that. And Mosaic and Vibrant both have pretty little charts that talk about like what binders to use depending on what mycotoxins. I tried it. I tried it that way for a bit and just didn't see the long-term results that we were hoping for at the time. And if you look at some of the big protocols that are out there related to mold, if you read some of the books, they really lean into this. And I just haven't seen it from an actual like application experience, and or it can take forever. This is where you're getting like most people when they work with mold, they have 2 or 3 years. We're usually 12 months or less. If someone's really sensitive, I say give us like 18, maybe 24 months, depending on what they got going on and their consistency with things. But, usually 12 months or less. 8 to 12 months is a pretty good estimate. And they're good. And we're all set. And we typically don't run mycotoxin tests. It is a case by case basis, but a lot of times we don't, because once again, I just don't think it matters as much, because when I was doing more of that, it didn't make a big difference, and people weren't seeing the results that we were really hoping for. Versus the way we do it now is, okay, you've got mycotoxin issues, we've got mold issues, we can confirm that, and we're going to do the fulvic and humic acid as a big piece of it, with Carboxy. And then if we need to do some secondary work, we'll do that. And that can look different depending on the person. And we will use a combination of different binders and tools. And phosphatidylcholine is something that we'll often add in depending on the person too, to help with thinning that bile, for the detoxification process. But yeah, we have a very high success rate now, much, much, much higher than it used to be. So I really like our approach that we have now.
Hey, when it works, no need to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's worked for hundreds of people. So I feel like that's a pretty good amount of case studies, that we've tried this on and seen just a lot of success. So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you got a lot out of this. If you want to hear some more of the technical side and deeper dives into any pieces that we talked about today, comment, leave us a message, send us an email, and I can happily dive deeper into any and all of, I mean, I could probably talk about just 2 of Cellcore's binders for a whole hour by themselves. And I'm not going to, obviously, in this episode, and I can. If anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to do that. So thank you for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.